Morning, everybody. Craig from OneFix here, joined with Kristian from Datto. Hi, Kristian.
Morning, Craig. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So we're delighted today to have Kristian with us as a guest, and today we're going to be doing a webinar on are your systems truly disaster ready? So I'm not going to spoil it by kind of giving a synopsis of what's going to happen because Kristian's going to do a much better job on that than I will. What I wanted to do very quickly is I'll just very quickly run through, for those of you that don't know, a little bit about OneFix, who we are and what we do. So my name's Craig. I'm the Managing Director of OneFix, and we are a team of 13 of us. We're based in Winner's Triangle near Reading, and we are an IT managed service provider. So what that basically means is we provide help desk, technical support, all that kind of good stuff. What you can see on the screen at the moment, you can see a few of the different awards that we've been kind of nominated for and winning this year. So we're really pleased. We've had a sort of a bit of an amazing award-winning year, and we've been, finalists in the Thames Valley Tech Awards this year. We've been in the ITU Europa Channel Awards for corporate culture. Basically, we've got an amazing team of people to help support you and your teams with your IT challenges. As I say, in terms of what we do, you can see on screen now, it's kind of a mixture of different things, but our primary thing we do is kind of IT support, wrapping around that cybersecurity services. We do project work, kind of cloud hosting, connectivity, telephony, business continuity, which is kind of what we're going to touch on today, and compliance. So that's a little bit about OneFix and about me. I'm going to be quiet for a little while now, and I'm going to let Kristian give us all of the insights about sort of Datto and being disaster ready. So Kristian, I'll click on to the next slide and I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Craig. Really appreciate that. In terms of business continuity and disaster ready, I'm afraid it can be a little bit of a downheartening conversation to have a lot of the time because it involves a lot of what if thinking and a lot of worst case scenario type modeling. So we'll walk through that in a little bit more detail throughout today. But a brief agenda of what I'm going to talk about today is the difference between backup, straightforward data backup for a rainy day in case the worst should happen, and what a business continuity and disaster recovery, or BCDR, solution looks like, and why that exists in terms of the threat landscape that we sit in at the moment. And then towards the end of the discussion, we'll start to think about what to do and whether our existing backup solution or business continuity solution or even disaster recovery solution, what the differences between those are, we'll touch on. But whether our existing solution is even relevant to us or is fit for purpose in this day and age. So to jump into a little bit more detail, what is the threat landscape out there at the moment? Well, we've seen many examples, and we continue to see many examples in the news at the moment in terms of ransomware attacks and what they look like, and malware, and cybersecurity is a big buzzword at the moment. And there's a lot of different threat vectors that exist in the IT landscape at the moment, and many of those are listed onto the screen at the moment. Security, I think, particularly in an IT instances, is a layered approach, much in the same way that you would secure a property or a building with an alarm, with a security guard, with CCTV, with smoke, lasers, shutters, etc. that you'd want to secure that building with. It's a very similar approach in IT security, and we believe at Datto, and certainly with our partners here with OneFix, that backup or business continuity is that last line of defense, is that ultimate safety net, and is a platform from which to build in terms of that IT approach. Now, the attacks out there in the wilderness at the moment, they continue to rise, and it's a pretty scary place out there at times. There was a 300% increase in reported cybercrime since COVID-19, with 92% of ransomware increase in ransomware attacks in 2021. In our cybersecurity report in 2022, 59% of our MSP partners said that remote work had increased ransomware attacks, and was a huge part of the increase of that was people working from home, it being more difficult to make their environments more cyber secure and safe. So we only need to look into the news to see that these threats are real. They're not just statistics on my PowerPoint screen here. These are actually 4 different news articles from this time last year, which indicate the ransomware attacks that might be occurring in different businesses. We've got different hospitals on here. We've even got Holcroft Motor Group was hit by a major ransomware attack around this time last year as well. Some pretty substantial business sizes and certainly some substantial IT security investment has gone into these businesses, yet they're still targeted by things like ransomware and malicious malware, etc., as well as we go forwards. I'd invite you actually at the end of this call, if you really want to doom scroll, is to get yourself into onto Google and just type in your local area and the word ransomware or ransomware news today, and you'll find more and more examples of businesses similar in size to yourselves, or even much larger on the enterprise scale, being hit by things like ransomware and malicious softwares. But some of those businesses are huge, right? And you can see why they'd be targeted, because they've certainly got the budget to pay things like ransoms and to try and mitigate things like ransomware attacks, etc. But actually, small and medium businesses are the soft targets. To use the phrase, unfortunately, that you're the low-hanging fruit for cyber criminals. More than 80% of cyber victims were small and medium businesses in Q4 2021. And I'd hazard that that's remained around about the same until the present day now. 60% of small businesses experiencing a cyber attack go out of business within 6 months of that cyber attack, which is staggering and is alarming and is very worrying indeed. So we'll talk around what we try to do here along with our partners at OneFix in order to try and combat that as best we can. So let's talk around the differences between a backup solution and a business continuity solution. So a backup is a replication of data from wherever your data lives, whether it be on site with your on-premise server traditional infrastructure, or whether your data now lives in the cloud or in SaaS applications. And the backup will just simply copy that data from one place to another, should you need it on a rainy day. A backup is usually compliant with the best practice of backup, a 3-2-1 rule as we call it, where you'll have 3 live copies of your data across 2 different locations, one of which is completely offsite or away from the original data point where that's stored. But backup does the job. This is not a discussion today around bashing backup and saying it's wrong and it's terrible and it's certainly not good enough. It's certainly fit for purpose in most instances, but today's about discovering whether it's fit for purpose for your particular business requirements. Backup will take time to restore, and that's the key. We're going to dive into that worst case scenario thinking, that deep dive into the what if model, and try and understand whether the time it would take to do a restore via a backup is good enough for you. Business continuity and disaster recovery will also copy data from one location to the other, as any good backup will, but it also adds more redundancy. So we move away from the traditional 3-2-1 best practice model, and we move towards a 4-3-2 practice model, which is essentially 4 live copies of your data across 3 different locations, 2 of which are offsite. So we add more layers and more recovery selection points involved in that as well, more different places to restore from. We take multiple backups per day. So we start to talk about recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. And if you're taking a backup once per day, then as a worst case scenario, if you need to restore from that, you may end up with 23 hours and 30 minutes of lost data as you restore back to that point in time. If you take multiple backups per day, that chunk of data lost is much smaller. It improves recovery time. We'll talk about recovery time objectives. How quickly can we get our data back? And it allows the continuous access to your data, even during the disaster, in inverted commas, disaster, whatever that may be, ransomware, fire, flood, power failure in the local area, user error and data loss, whatever that might be. But that point there is completely key to the whole ethos behind business continuity solutions, maintaining the access to your critical business data and application software during a disaster, in inverted commas. So the average amount of downtime for a small and medium business due to ransomware is 20 days. That is the average business interruption. So you may not be down for that full 20 days, but it's certainly going to impact your business for a 20-day period. 20 days is a long time in life, let alone in business. That's 20 days worth of lost invoicing, lost client activity, lost performance. We also have an average of £8,000 per hour of downtime for a small and medium business. Now, it might be much less for you. It might be much more for you as an average, some more, some less. But that is a cost per hour of downtime for a ransomware attack. So how do we make this relevant to you and your business and what your recovery time and recovery point objectives may be? So we start to look at how long an instance of data loss might mean for your business not to be up and running, not to be functional, not to be operational. So if we take the average download speed, according to Virgin Media, in the UK, that is 86.5 megabits per second of download speed, which seems pretty fast to me. I certainly don't get speeds like that in Stoke-on-Trent, where I live. And I had a modest amount of data in the cloud, maybe 2 terabytes of business critical data. How long do you think that would take to download? And the answer is fairly alarming. It's more than 55 hours worth of downtime. Now, that is just to download your data back. That is before one fixer on site, rebuilding your server, or making that data usable for you in your business. So it's easy to imagine 3, 4, 5 business days lost to an outage of some description. And that could be ransomware, or it could be the most simple of hardware failures, or a corrupted hard drive, or a motherboard failure on your server infrastructure. It could be really simple to get to that point just from a simple failure. And unfortunately, those costs of downtime associated are skyrocketing. They almost quadrupled from 2018 to 2019, and they doubled again from 2019 to 2020. And we're starting to see huge gaps in productivity as we're going through downtime, as IT systems become more and more complex and more difficult to get back up and running in the event of a disaster. So we've talked about the money element, we've talked about the loss in time, we've talked about the loss in revenue, and we can also start to talk now about the loss in PR. We can start to talk about lost custom during those outages. We can start to talk about breaches of compliance, whether that be from a GDPR aspect or a compliancy that your particular market space has to adhere to. It can be a loss of personal information, or it can even involve a ransomware payment itself, although that's completely unadvised. Just to touch on ransomware and what it does and how it operates in a little bit more detail, essentially at its very highest overview level, ransomware would be a malicious software that would be injected into your business critical servers or applications or even your laptop, and essentially over time start to encrypt that data to the point where you'd need a passkey in order to access that. That passkey will be on a ransom demand. You'll have to pay probably in Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency in order to get that data back. And they can be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds to get that data back. If you go through the process with a crypto hacker in order to get your data back, you're relying on the good word of a criminal, essentially, in order to give them the correct key. Often we see small and medium businesses go through that process because they've got no other option to, and then we'll find that they are listed somewhere on the dark web as a good payer in the event of a crypto hack as well. So it's never advised to go through that process, although we appreciate that often it can be a last resort. So does your business need a business continuity and disaster recovery solution? Well, let's find out. We have to do the homework in order to figure that out. And one fix is certainly on hand to help you through that process. But in order to figure out whether we would benefit from a business continuity and disaster recovery solution, we have to look at what we would like our recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives to be. Our recovery points being how much data am I happy to lose in the process of restoring? How often am I backing up? When was my last healthy backup? And your recovery time objectives being how long can I go without that business critical software or that business critical data? What's the time scales involved? So there's a couple of questions on the screen that will help you determine what your recovery time and recovery point objectives are. On the left-hand side, we have how quickly do you want to recover? How long is too long? And what will be the impact of that downtime in terms of money, in terms of reputation and legislation and damage to those two things, as well as the general pain of going through that themselves. On the left is your recovery time objectives. On the right, your recovery point objective questions. When was your last backup? Is it bootable? Have you checked it is? There's an alarming statistic out there in the general world. There's billions and billions of backups taking place every day. As many as between a third and half of those are corrupt. They're not bootable. They don't work. They're not worth taking a backup in the first place because they're just not fit for purpose in that recovery process. There's various things that OneFix and Datto do in order to combat that. But we need to understand whether your last backup was healthy and is fit for purpose in that restoration process as well. So take a note of these questions in terms of discovering what your recovery time and recovery point objectives should be. And that will go a long way to helping you determine whether your straightforward backup solution is fit for purpose and you're happy with that, or whether a business continuity solution could add some real value to you in a disaster scenario. Again, I did apologize at the beginning. There's a lot of worst case scenario thinking to go through here. We get a lot of objections to business continuity from our small and medium business partners in terms of myths that they've seen out in the wild. Business continuity has often had a conception that it's for real enterprise level businesses, and that's not necessarily the case. So we've listed here some myths around BCDR, and myth one that we get a lot of the time is exactly that. It's only for large enterprises. I'm not going to be the target. My business is fairly small, local business. It's not going to be the target for crypto hackers, etc. But as we saw on the slides earlier, more than 80% of ransomware attacks were to small and medium businesses because they're the so-called low-hanging fruit for those crypto hackers and malicious actors in the field. Secondly, backup is good enough. Well, not necessarily a myth sometimes. This could certainly be the case, certainly for those smaller businesses where that data is less critical to their business operations and so on. But certainly as that data becomes more of a requirement, it's accessed by more people, it's accessed more times per day, it becomes a real pain if you're living without that. Then that's where a business continuity solution would come into play. I don't have to worry because my business uses cloud services. I'm in the 21st century, thank you. And I'm running in Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Azure, and I've got virtual machines outside of an on-premise infrastructure. Well, the basics of backup and the basics of business continuity remain exactly the same wherever that data lives, whether it be in M365 or Google Workspace, or whether it be in places like Microsoft Azure or another public or private cloud elsewhere. You need to make sure that you're still adhering to that 3-2-1 rule, at least. You need to still think about recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives. All clouds are the same is another one we get quite often in terms of, well, if I'm operating in the cloud and I'm replicating to your cloud, I can't see what I'm gaining from that. Well, first off, there's the multi-cloud approach. Secondly, there's the additional redundancy that a second cloud infrastructure will bring to you. But also, Datto's infrastructure is custom built for business continuity and disaster recovery. It is an immutable cloud infrastructure, which is really substantial. It's got 9 data centers across 4 different continents around the globe and exabytes in terms of storage capability in each one of those. And it's all built in a robust way so that data cannot be altered once that backup has been taken, meaning it's an immutable backup and certainly something worth looking into a little bit further. All BCDR solutions offer equal protection. Even we have those partners that have a business continuity solution in place, etc., etc. What Datto work alongside our partners OneFix in order to offer into our partner base is a full holistic plug-in and play, really robust solution where we supply the hardware and the software and the cloud infrastructure, and we distribute the product and we support it as a team as well, so that we can offer you complete accountability over that solution rather than relying on multiple vendors in order to be able to piece together a Lego-based solution for you in the marketplace. That enables our partners to have a faster response time for you, and it also means more uptime of the product as well in that instance. So how do we do it? What's the solution that we provide in order to allow a business continuity solution to be a really viable option to our small and medium business partners in the field? Well, this is Datto Cirrus from a really high level introduction on the screen here. You can see on the left-hand side of the diagram, you would have your business critical systems running, in this example, on server infrastructure, whether it be virtual machines or whether it be physical servers in your office space. And we're going to install alongside that what we call our Cirrus appliance, which, as you can see on the screen already, it's sat within the same local area network as your server infrastructure, and it's backing up as often as every 5 minutes. So before we go any further on that diagram, we've addressed two huge pieces of that recovery point objective and recovery time objective. Recovery time objective of a device that sits within your same office space means that we're not limited to things like latency and bandwidth speeds, etc., or downloading data in order to build a new server for you. We can virtualize that on the Cirrus appliance. We also have recovery point objectives improved vastly by backing up data as often as every 5 minutes. So the worst case scenario in a period of downtime is you've lost 4 minutes and 59 seconds worth of data if you're really unlucky. That might be overkill for you, but we can work with you in terms of the configuration of that backup in more detail. But we also then have the various verification checks that we have that we offer to you in order to make sure that your backups are not corrupted and make sure that they are bootable in the event of downtime or a disaster. So we work with OneFix to offer screenshot verification, where we'll spin up those backups, take them all the way to the login screen and take a screenshot as proof that your backup is bootable at that occasion. The same can be said for the applications running on the server as well. And the really key feature here is ransomware detection. Every backup that we take is subject to a ransomware detection sweep. So we're starting to look for the behaviors of ransomware, things that ransomware would do, and start to flag them up on the backups as a really good indicator that they might start to be taking place on the servers themselves as well, so that we can be proactive in containing a ransomware threat as well as recovering from it. We then have the replication into the Datto cloud, where we can do a virtualization from there. So if we're having a really bad day, and we're looking at a really doom scenario here of a fire, a flood, a power failure in the local area, and all of your systems are offline, you've sent all of your staff to work from home, we could spin those servers up, clone them in the Datto cloud, and continue business operations from that infrastructure via VPN link or anything that you'd need in terms of the networking configurations. I'm sure Craig and his team would be on hand to enable all of that for you. So from a really high level perspective, Datto Cirrus is a solution that will offer business continuity and disaster recovery level services, enterprise level services through our MSP partners to small and businesses in the UK and beyond. Craig, was there anything you wanted to add at this point, sir?
Thanks, Kristian. Yeah, I thought it was quite useful actually to, one of the things that people often ask me when we look at solutions like this is kind of talking about real world examples, and it's I've got a couple. I've actually got something I'll show you actually on the next slide. This very regional, so again, for those of you on the call that are local to us, you'll probably know Bracknell. It's up the road from Reading. This was a real life example. It wasn't a client of ours, thankfully, but this was a broadcasting company actually that was based in a big warehouse in Bracknell, and they had a massive fire in 2018. And this is on, I think it's on Bracknell News actually. It's still there because I grabbed the screenshot this morning. And they were talking at the time that they were super fortunate, as you can see, you can read in the text there, that 18 months before they had that fire, they had a new system installed called Datto, which they'd invested in the Datto solution. For them, that kept their business afloat. I mean, I think they were out of action for about 14 months at that site, but they were able to relocate their offices. Obviously, had to buy new stock, but they were actually able to get all their back office systems back up and running. And they they went out to the media and were saying at the time, look, if we didn't have this system in place, we would have been absolutely scuppered. I think it's one of those things that when you look at these kind of solutions, we all worry about things like fire, but actually, as you've already touched on, Chris, the ransomware threat is actually the most likely and the biggest possibility. And I know when we've done kind of conversations and calls before with different partners, we'll talk about even things like cyber insurance. And there's so many people that sort of think twice or three times about taking cyber insurance, but would never consider not insuring against fire and flood and that kind of stuff. And the fire and the flood are probably hopefully a never in a business lifetime event, if not a once in a business lifetime event. Whereas with your stats there, they're saying 60% of so many crypto attacks and so many different ransomware attacks happening across businesses that having something in place is so crucial. So that was one kind of real life example. We had another example, which was actually I came across fairly recently. We, again, as a kind of a managed service provider, we network with a lot of other people. One of our group partners that I know of quite well, who runs a business up in Scotland, they had a massive challenge with a client of theirs who ran a series of different shops, and they got hit by an attack that came in through the back door. In fact, these guys had got fantastic security all over the place, and these attackers still got in. There was a massive tear down of the network to find out what happened. They were having to bring systems online one by one. Again, luckily they had I think pretty sure it was a Datto system they had as well for backup and DR, so they managed to get some of the servers back up pretty quickly. But that whole process, I think I spoke to him probably 6 weeks ago, and that had dragged on for over 2 months. That the business was gradually getting their systems restored because they were being checked through, trying to make sure they were absolutely clean. So it was, it was everybody's worst nightmare. It was the IT service provider's worst nightmare. It was the business owner's worst nightmare. Luckily, again, with BCDR, they were able to get back up and running. If they'd have just had backup, I think they'd have probably just closed the stores, and that would have been the end of it. So
and so many businesses do exactly that. As you say, in these examples here, they're pretty substantial. Once in a business lifetime events, fire throughout the whole building, etc. You hope that doesn't happen very regularly at all, especially on a local, regional basis. But data loss in general can be user error. It can be ransomware attack. It can be any of those things. And when you start to see statistics out there of 60% of small businesses within 6 months have gone out of business, it is alarming, really is. We often lose the weight of that because it's a statistic we use often.
And I think that can be the danger with sometimes with when you have statistics, it can become a bit information overload, can't it? But it's I guess it's certainly that point that it is super important. I've got a couple of questions actually that I'd like to ask you, and then if anybody who's in the webinar at the moment, if you've got questions, I think on probably the right hand side of your screen you've got a chat or a Q&A panel, so feel free to type those in and we can address them. But I mean, one of the things was around kind of cloud services. You touched on it. Obviously, we're seeing as a business many more people moving kind of traditional on-premise servers up into the cloud. I mean, if they're doing it with us, it'll be into Azure with Microsoft because we're a Microsoft house. And I think you touched on the fact that that doesn't get away from the need for BCDR. But I mean, how does that fit? What does Datto do for people that have got their stuff in the cloud? Because let's say I'm getting rid of my server. What do I do? How do I get Datto?
Yeah, great question. Well, first off, we see the move towards things like Microsoft Azure is often a hybrid approach. We often still have some form of on-premise infrastructure in most circumstances as we move to Microsoft Azure and we start that process. And that can be years in the making of really becoming a cloud central business. So the protection is still relevant for that on-premise infrastructure. But now we also offer a solution called Datto Continuity for Microsoft Azure, which is exactly the same solution that you've just seen there for the on-premise infrastructures, but for those virtual servers living in Microsoft Azure as well. So a lot of people will start to look at, again, that same kind of myth that we need to bust. It's in the cloud, so it's backed up, etc. Well, if you're backing up a Microsoft solution into another Microsoft solution, and you're talking to things like cyber insurance, etc., as you touched on just there, Craig, what they'll start to look for is that multi-cloud approach in order to be compliant with that 3-2-1 best practice of backup. Because at the same time as you're backing up from Microsoft Azure to another data center within Microsoft Azure, that still classes as one entity. It's almost like backing up your server locally to another server across the room as far as a cyber insurer is concerned. So we start to look at people using a multi-cloud approach. And again, the same basics remain in place. The backup versus BCDR conversation, whether a business continuity solution is still relevant to you when you're in Microsoft Azure. If that completely failed, or that VM were to be corrupted, or whatever that might look like, how quickly do you need that back up and running? And when was that last backup? And these are all the same things that Datto Continuity for Microsoft Azure addresses as the business continuity solution for on-premise servers as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Excellent. The question here from Jess, actually, how often do you recommend people review and update their disaster recovery plans?
I would say as often as there's a general change within the business. I would probably put a stake in the ground to start to review this 6 monthly or annually. But if there's a major change in the amount of staff that you have, or the turnover of the business increases within a short period, then I'd start to reassess those business continuity plans, because it might start to tweak the requirements that you have in those instances as well. We actually have a tool online, which is datto.com/RTO, which is a recovery time cost calculator. And essentially, you'll put in some figures around your business and how many staff you have and what the overheads of those staff are and what your turnover is. And it'll ask you some questions around your networking configurations and so on. I'm sure you'll be able to help on that aspect, Craig. But essentially, it will spit out a figure of what a business continuity solution would cost you in terms of downtime, and what a backup solution would cost you in terms of downtime. And it's a really straightforward piece of kit to use on that website. It's great. It probably takes 3 or 4 minutes to input that information. So it really shouldn't be a hard task to go through on a 6 monthly, annual, or even more frequent basis in order to just make sure that your business continuity plan for those server infrastructures, because there's a whole different business continuity plan for your staff and where they go and the buildings, etc., and your assets. It's the easiest thing to keep on top of, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I would add to that also, I guess that's it's a real case of checking, as you said, what you've got, expand that across the business, because again, your DR and your disaster recovery plan, as much as IT is a key part of that, it's not the only part of that. So make sure that kind of stretches across the entire business, involve all the different key stakeholders. But also, we did an event earlier in the year, actually, and it was, I think it's the first event we did in person at Bombay Sapphire, actually, and I think it was with Datto as well, actually. And that was all around, again, that kind of business continuity and the best practices. And someone had a great point, which was actually make sure you get that whole business continuity plan, kind of break it down so that it's nice and easy to follow, because when you're in a disaster, obviously everybody's flipping out. You can't panicking, absolutely. But also make sure you've got that printed and take it out of the office. Make sure there's a copy that isn't in the middle of the office, because the biggest problem is we've had a massive disaster, where's the DR plan? Oh, it's in that filing cabinet in the office that we now can't get into. So yeah, making sure you've got offline copies of that plan, I think was probably one of the key takeaways actually from that event. Is get that printed out and get it off, get it out of the digital systems, get it printed, get a copy at home, make sure the key people have got that. So
yeah, or pop it onto your server and have a Datto solution back it up into the Datto cloud.
Well. There you go. Yeah. And make sure you've got your key contact number so you can actually know how to call your IT company when everything's gone absolutely belly up. So
on speed dial. Yeah.
What was that link again, Kristian?
Datto.com/RTO, Romeo Tango Oscar. It's a great website, and it's really straightforward to follow. There might be a couple of questions on there in terms of your download speed, or how often your current solution's backing up and things like that you might just need to double check. But the majority of it's rough calculations. And essentially what it would do is simulate a active downtime, but just show you the figures associated to it. And it would say your backup solution will take 18 hours to restore from, and that in terms of your loss in revenue and the money you've had to pay your staff and things like that during that period would cost you X. And the Datto solution might be 36 minutes is the time we use in our calculations, 30 of which is what we allow them to give you a call, Craig, and say something's gone wrong. And then that remaining 6 minutes is to spin up that. Now, that's not a specific SLA. That's just what we use in our calculations to kind of show the difference between those two solutions. But then it will say the Datto solution, your downtime cost would be Y, and it can show you the difference, which is often thousands of pounds in downtime costs that are either macroeconomic or, otherwise.
I guess that ramps up so quickly if you've got, the more employees you've got, the quicker that cost ramps up, and also, I guess, the higher the sale of your product prices, the quicker that ramps up as well if you can't sell. So
the best example I've had of that, Craig, was working with a partner that was looking after a solicitors chain up in the northeast of England, and they'd probably got 80 different solicitors working for them. Now, what's the hourly rate of a solicitor? And all of those 80 solicitors were contacting one central server network. Now, if that one central server network went down for 2 hours, what is the cost in lost revenue of those 80 solicitors? And not just the 80 solicitors, but the 40 support staff that they might have working for them, admin or secretaries or office managers and things like that. So that cost started to ramp up. And then you start to think about the sensitivity of what the solicitors are working on. Now, if I'd at a very key point in my house sale a few years ago, if my solicitor was offline for 2 hours, that could have been the difference between closure or not. So then we start to look at what the kind of implications of all of that can be, and it can really multiply fairly quickly. But that was a really stark example where I thought, wow, this is the extreme of absolutely needing a business continuity solution in there. But it can also work for food manufacturers. If they've got 20 people working on shifts 24/7, and it went off in the middle of the night, and we've got food going off on the shelves that we can't pack, and we've got orders we can't ship out and invoices we can't facilitate, then that can really ramp up as well in terms of those downtime costs.
That's a good shout. I think one of the other things I wanted to highlight that you touched upon, I think was a really key point, was that whole thing of backup checking, and also again with that recovery time. Obviously, your example there focused on kind of something in the cloud and downloading it, but I mean, I've got some real life examples where we've had clients we've inherited in the past where they've had things like USB drive backups, and actually, that as a whole, roll back 10 years, that was probably the best solution. It was certainly better than tape drives. They were terrible, but USB drives, people were swapping those every day, and we had a company where their server went down, and got the USB drives, did the restore, even the restore of the data from USB back to kind of the bench server that we had. I think took us 8 or 9 hours to get the data from that USB drive across, and then it didn't boot. And it wasn't actually a broken backup, it was actually just the fact of, again, doing that kind of restore to dissimilar hardware, and the amount of time we spent to get that system back up and running. I think it was probably, again, another day of downtime for them just to get that back.
Absolutely.
And that was a working backup. I mean, if the backup hadn't worked, God, we'd have been going back through previous drives and trying to find the working point, restoring it. I think having that safety net that that the backup's been tested is huge, because hand on heart, if I was if we were still using USB drive backups for our business, we'd be testing them probably once every couple of months, if that, because it's just so time consuming. It's not something you can easily do.
The most common answer to the question that I ask of how often are you checking the bootability of your backups? The answer is either not as often as we should or never. They're the two options. I've very rarely, probably 2 or 3 times in the 3 years that I've worked at Datto, asking that question, I've had we test it every week, or every week, every day certainly improvement to every week. You could still be 6 days, or I mean, if your middle one has failed, 13 days before you've got a recovery point, etc. I've even seen USBs with the backup on stored in a fireproof box in the office. Well, it wouldn't burn the USB, but it would certainly melt within the fireproof box. So yeah, you get your backups outside of the premises as a general rule. On premise, yes, for that speed of recovery, but that hybrid approach of having them offsite as well is certainly the belt and braces approach, I think.
Makes perfect sense. Not seeing any more questions in the chat. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about, or you'd like to cover off, or do you think we're we've
No,
covered all the key points.
I think the key is making sure that you're taking your backups as seriously, no matter where they live, whether they be on premise or whether they be in the cloud or in software applications. That data needs to be backed up elsewhere in an immutable fashion. It can't be altered by things like ransomware, etc. And keep on top of those business continuity plans as your business evolves and as time goes by. I think they're the key takeaways from today.
Fantastic. Well, Kristian, look, really appreciate your time being with us today to share that information with us. People on the webinar, if you would like more information about Datto, how Datto and OneFix can help you kind of meet those recovery time objectives and make sure your business is secure, you can see on the bottom of the screen there is our telephone number, our Twitter handles below there. We're www.one-fix.com. I'll put that in the chat as well, so don't forget, www.onefix.com. There we go. Please reach out to us, reach out to me. We'd love to have a chat with you and see how we can help. But Kristian, thank you again for taking up the time today to be with us, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for having me, Craig. All the best. Take care.
All the best. Thanks all. Bye.